Lovely Vassilisa. Retold by Barbara Cohen. Illustrated by Anatoly Ivanov. Long ago and far away, there lived a merchant and his wife. They had only one child, a beautiful daughter named Vassilisa. When Vassilisa was still young, her mother became ill with a strange disease no doctor could cure. She lay down in her bed and called Vassilisa to her. "My child," she said, "it's time for me to give you my blessing, and with it, a gift." From beneath her covers she took a doll carved out of wood. "Whenever you're in trouble, put some food in front of this little doll and say to it, 'Little dear, listen here, eat your fill, do your will.' Then, after the doll is eaten, tell it what is wrong, and it will help you." Vassilisa took the doll in her hand. "Little dear," she repeated, "listen here, eat your fill, do your will." "That's right," said Vassilisa's mother. She smiled at Vassilisa. "God bless you," she whispered. She kissed her, and then she died. A few months later, the merchant married a handsome widow. He thought that because she already had 2 daughters, she would know how to be a good mother to Vassilisa. He was wrong. Vassilisa was beautiful and good. The new wife's own daughters were plain spiteful and lazy. The stepmother and stepsisters wanted nothing so much as to see Vassilisa's beauty and goodness destroyed. They made her do all the hard work in the house, they gave her very little to eat, and they tormented her with every word they said to her. Vassilisa never complained, and as the years passed, the stepsisters' hatefulness gnawed at them. Each day they grew uglier and uglier, but Vassilisa grew lovelier and lovelier. It was more than the stepmother could bear. Whenever Vassilisa's father was away on trading journeys, which was most of the year, she would work and starve Vassilisa nearly to death. She would beat her, too, whenever she claimed that Vassilisa was not working hard enough. When that happened, Vassilisa would lock herself from the pantry. She would take out her wooden doll and set half her own meager supper in front of the precious thing. "Little dear," she would say, "listen here. Eat your fill, do your will." The doll would eat the food while Vassilisa poured out all her troubles. "Go to bed," the doll would say. "Morning is wiser than evening." And the next day the stepmother and stepsisters would sleep very late. When at last they got out of bed, they would find the garden weeded, the house swept clean, the samovar shining like the sun, all the animals brushed and fed, and Vassilisa sitting in the shade, twining flowers in her hair. They couldn't understand how Vassilisa could do so much so quickly and not seem the least bit tired. They never suspected that the doll did the work. It looked, after all, no different from any other doll. When Vassilisa was full grown, she was courted by all the young men in the neighborhood. No man, young or old, ever called on the stepsisters. The stepmother was more infuriated than ever, and when Vassilisa's father left on what was to be a very long journey, she seized the opportunity to get rid of Vassilisa for good. She closed up the house in town and moved to a cottage on the edge of a vast, dark forest. In the middle of the forest lived a terrible witch, Baba Yaga. Everyone knew that Baba Yaga ate men and women whenever she got the chance, especially young ones who were juicy and tender, like lovely Vassilisa. One evening the stepmother said, "Dearest elder daughter, tat some lace. Darling younger daughter, knit some stockings. Stupid Vassilisa, spin some yarn." And she snuffed out all the lamps in the house and went to bed. The only light left was a candle in the corner where the 3 sisters were working. The elder sister reached for the candle to trim the wax. She dropped it as if by accident, and the flame went out. But it was no accident. Her mother had told her to do it. "What now?" cried the younger sister. "If we don't finish our work, our mother will scold us all day tomorrow. One of us will have to go ask Baba Yaga for a light." "Not I," insisted the elder sister. "My tatting shuttle is shiny enough to see by." "Well, then, not I either," the younger sister announced. "My knitting needles are shiny enough to see by, too." "Must be you, Vassilisa," said the elder sister. "You must ask Baba Yaga for a light." The two sisters grabbed hold of Vassilisa and pushed her out the cottage door into the blackness of the night. Vassilisa took out her doll and gave it the piece of black bread she'd been saving for supper. "Little dear, listen here. Eat your fill. Do your will," Vassilisa murmured, and then she cried, "Oh, little doll, what should I do? Surely Baba Yaga will eat me up." "Surely she won't," said the doll. "If I'm with you, you haven't anything to be afraid of." So Vassilisa set out through the dark forest, carrying her doll with her. After she'd traveled many hours, a horseman dressed all in white and riding the white steed galloped past her. The sky glowed with the first light of dawn. More hours went by. Vassilisa pressed on. Another horseman, this one all in red and riding a red steed, galloped past her. The sun rose high in the sky. When the long shadows of evening began to close in around her, Vassilisa at last reached Baba Yaga's hut. It stood on a long, scaly chicken leg and was surrounded by a fence of human skeletons topped with skulls. The gate was no gate, but the bones of hips and legs. Its bolt was no bolt, but the bones of arms. Its lock was no lock, but a set of teeth. Vassilisa shivered at the sight. A third horseman, all in black and riding a black steed, galloped by. Dark night fell. The eyes of the skulls began to glow like fire. A moment later, Vassilisa heard the rustling in the trees behind her. The rustling grew to a roar. She turned just in time to see Baba Yaga emerging from the forest. The old witch rode in a mortar. She whipped it along with a pestle she carried in one hand. With the broom that she held in her other hand, she swept away her tracks. Baba Yaga's head turned this way and that way as her long, sharp nose sniffed the air around her. "I smell the meat of a Russian," she shouted in an awful voice. When the mortar stopped, Vassilisa came close to Baba Yaga, clenching her fists together so she wouldn't shake with fear. She bowed low and said politely, "It's I, Grandma. My stepsister sent me to ask you for a light."
Did they now?" cackled the old crone. "Let's see what you can do to earn such a gift."
Then she shouted again, "My lock come unlocked, my bolt come unbolted, my gate open wide." The gate swung forward, Baba Yaga rolled through it, Vassilisa followed, and the gate slammed shut behind them. Once inside the hut, Baba Yaga sat down on her bench.
"Bring me supper," she ordered. "I'm hungry."
In the stove and cupboards, Vassilisa found food enough for an entire village. Baba Yaga ate it all, and drank glass after glass of kvass, wine, beer, mead, and vodka. She left just half a slice of bread and half a cup of soup for Vassilisa.
"I'm leaving again first thing in the morning," she announced. "When I'm away, rake the yard, sweep the floor, and cook the dinner."
Vassilisa nodded. So far, the witch's hut was just like home. But Baba Yaga wasn't done.
"And then," she ordered, "go to the shed, take a sack of millet you'll find there, separate the good grains from the ones that have turned black. If you don't do it just right, I'll have you for supper tomorrow night."
And Baba Yaga stretched herself out on the bench and fell fast asleep. Immediately she began to snore, and her snores were so loud the whole house shook as if the earth were trembling. Vassilisa took out her doll and gave it the soup and black bread. "Little dear, listen here, eat your fill, do your will," Vassilisa whispered. "Oh, my darling doll, if you don't help me, the witch will eat me up." "Go to bed," the doll said. "Morning is wiser than evening." Next day, Vassilisa woke early. The white horseman galloped by on the path in front of the hut, and Baba Yaga woke up. The red horseman galloped by, and Baba Yaga climbed in her mortar and rolled away. The little dog raked the yard, swept the floor, separated the good grains of millet from the ones that had turned black. All that Vassilisa had to do was cook dinner. Long hours later, the black horseman rode by, and Baba Yaga returned.
"Well, Vassilisa," she roared, "did you do as I ordered?"
"See for yourself, Grandma," Vassilisa replied. The old crone inspected every corner of the hut, the yard, and the shed. Though she searched hard, she could find nothing that wasn't as it should have been. She gave Vassilisa a long look, and then she cried out,
"Come, my servants, grind my millet."
3 pairs of hands appeared, snatched up the sack of millet, and carried it off. Baba Yaga ate her supper, and then lay down on the bench.
"Tomorrow you must do just what you did today, and one more thing besides," she instructed Vassilisa. "You must take this sack of poppy seeds out of the shed and clean off all the dirt that clings to each seed. If you don't do it just right, I'll have you for supper tomorrow night."
As soon as those words were spoken, the witch fell fast asleep, snoring furiously. Vassilisa took out her doll. "Dear, listen here, eat your fill, do your will," she whispered. "Oh, my darling doll, if you don't help me, the witch will eat me up."
"Go to bed," the doll said. "Morning is wiser than evening."
Early the next day, Baba Yaga once again rolled away in her mortar. Again the doll did most of the work, cleaning the dirt from the poppy seeds in the blink of an eye. All that Vassilisa had to do was cook dinner. The black horseman rode by, darkness fell, and Baba Yaga returned.
"Well, Vassilisa," she roared, "did you do as I ordered?"
"See for yourself, Grandma," Vassilisa replied. The old crone inspected every corner of the hut, the yard, and the shed. Though she searched hard, she could find nothing that wasn't as it should have been. She gave Vassilisa a long look, and then she cried out,
"Come, my servants, squeeze the oil out of my poppy seeds."
3 pairs of hands appeared, snatched up the sack of poppy seeds, and carried it off. Baba Yaga went into the hut and sat down to her dinner. Vassilisa stood silently before her.
"What's the matter?" Baba Yaga scolded. "Did you swallow your tongue?"
"I was afraid to speak to you before," Vassilisa said, "but now, if I may, I'd like to ask you something."
"Ask away," the old crone said, "but remember, she who knows too much grows old too soon."
Vassilisa asked anyway. "As I came here through the forest, a horseman all in white on a white steed passed me by. Who was he, Grandma?"
"Early dawn,"
the witch replied. "And then a horseman all in red on a red steed passed me by. Who was he, Grandma?"
"Bright day."
"When I reached your gate, a horseman all in black on a black steed passed me by. Who was he, Grandma?"
"Darkest night," said the witch. "And all 3 of them are my faithful servants."
Vassilisa nodded as she thought of the 3 pairs of hands that had carried off the sacks of millet and poppy seeds, but she said nothing.
"Well," Baba Yaga queried sharply, "don't you have any more questions?"
Vassilisa lowered her eyes and smiled a little. "She who knows too much grows old too soon," she replied.
"Good girl," Baba Yaga cackled. "You ask questions about what goes on outside this house, but not what goes on inside it. I don't like people who are too curious about my business. I eat them up. Now I have a question for you. How were you able to do the work I gave you?"
"I had help," Vassilisa admitted. "My mother's blessing helped me." The witch stared at Vassilisa for a long moment. When at last she spoke again, she didn't roar or shout. Her voice was quiet.
"Get out of here," she said. "Go home. This is no place for those who belong to the King of Heaven. Another prince rules here."
Baba Yaga walked out into the yard with Vassilisa. She took one of the skulls with glowing eyes off the fence, stuck it on a stick, and handed it to Vassilisa.
"Here," she said. "Here's the light you came for. It'll show you the way home."
"Thank you, Grandma," Vassilisa said. "Goodbye."
"Goodbye, Vassilisa,"
Baba Yaga replied. She stood at her gate watching as Vassilisa disappeared down the path and into the forest. By the next evening, Vassilisa had reached her stepmother's cottage. She was sure that during her absence her stepsisters had acquired a light, so she decided to throw away the skull with glowing eyes. But just as she was about to drop it from her hand, a voice spoke from deep inside it. "Take me to your stepmother," it ordered. Vassilisa dared not disobey. She rapped on the cottage door, and the elder sister opened it. To Vassilisa's surprise, she smiled when she saw Vassilisa. "Oh, you're home!" she cried. "I'm so glad! All the while you were gone, we didn't have a spark of light in this house. Every time someone brought one in, it went out immediately." She hurried away to fetch her mother and her younger sister. The three of them rushed back into the room and seized the glowing skull from Vassilisa's hand. Its eyes stared at them, and then it burned them like fire. They screamed, threw the skull to the ground, and ran to hide in a corner, but the eyes followed them wherever they went. In a little while, they stopped screaming and collapsed on the floor. Soon, nothing was left of them but a heap of ashes. Then the light in the skull went out. Quickly, Vassilisa buried the skull in the yard. She didn't want to remain in the grim and lonely cottage. She went into the village, where a kind old woman who'd known her mother took her in. Many months passed by. Vassilisa spent her time spinning, and the thread that came from her wheel was as fine and smooth as her own hair. In the entire village there wasn't a loom delicate enough for weaving such thread into cloth. So Vassilisa fed her doll, as she did faithfully every night, and said, "Little dear, listen here. Eat your fill, do your will." Then she asked the doll, "How can I weave my thread into cloth?" "Get me reeds from the river bank," said the doll. "Get me hair from a horse's mane. I'll make you the kind of loom you need." Vassilisa did as the doll instructed. The doll made a loom subtle enough for the thread Vassilisa had spun. Vassilisa wove the thread into soft, translucent white cloth. She gave the cloth to the old woman. "You've been so good to me, Grandma," she said. "Take this cloth, sell it in the market, and keep the money. It will be a small payment to you for your great kindness to me." But the old woman thought the cloth too fine for any ordinary person. She carried it to the palace of the handsome young Tsar, who in those long ago days ruled the entire country. She paced back and forth beneath the Tsar's window until finally he looked out and noticed her. He sent a servant to fetch her. "Why are you wearing out your old legs beneath my window?" the Tsar asked. "Sit down, rest yourself." The old woman bowed low before him. Then she presented him with the basket in which she had placed Vassilisa's cloth. The Tsar rubbed the material between his thumb and forefinger. He thought he owned every precious thing in the world, but he'd never seen anything like this cloth. "I must have it," he announced. "How much do you want for it?" "It's beyond price," said the old woman. "I give it to you as a gift." The Tsar was so pleased that he showered the old woman with presents and sent her home in a magnificent carriage pulled by 6 white horses. The Tsar gave the cloth to his tailors, but they could do nothing with it. The cloth was too fine. Their needles and scissors couldn't hold it. So he sent for the old woman, and he said to her, "Take the cloth back again and make it into shirts. Only the one who wove it could ever stitch it." "Oh, my Tsar," said the old woman, "I didn't make that cloth. It was woven by my adopted daughter, Vassilisa." "Let her stitch it then," said the Tsar. The old woman carried the cloth back to Vassilisa and told her all that had happened in the Tsar's palace. "I knew all along that my work was not yet done," replied Vassilisa. She locked the door, sat all alone sewing. She worked day and night. She worked without eating or sleeping, until with her tiny golden needle she had sewn the cloth into 12 shirts. The old woman took the shirts back to the Tsar. After she had gone, Vassilisa washed her face, combed her hair, and put on her best dress. Then she sat by the window, waiting to see what would happen next. Soon one of the Tsar's servants appeared in the yard. He rapped at the door. Vassilisa let him in. "The Tsar wants to see this skillful seamstress," the servant explained. He wants to meet the one who made the shirts and gave them to him as a gift. He wants to reward her with his own hand."
Vassilisa went to the palace with the servant. She walked through the Tsar's wide doorway, down his long mirrored corridors, and into his golden throne room, and bowed before him. As soon as the Tsar laid eyes on Vassilisa, he fell head over heels in love with her.
"Oh, my beauty," he cried, "I must never be separated from you. I'm going to make you my wife."
He stepped down from his throne, took her white hand in his, and led her to the seat beside him. The very next week they were married, and the whole country rejoiced. Vassilisa took the old woman into the palace to live with her. Later, when her father returned from his long journey, he was delighted with the way things had turned out. Vassilisa took him into the palace to live with her too, and from her little wooden doll she was never parted as long as she lived.